Like a cemetery that holds only one body deemed worthy of eternal rest, the avoidant heart reserves its deepest vault for a single soul. Most people cycle through their lives like autumn leaves, present for a season, then swept away by the wind. But there exists one rare specimen who bypasses their defenses entirely. Not through force, but through the peculiar alchemy of being utterly unthreatening to their carefully constructed fortress. This is not a romantic fairy tale where love conquers all through dramatic gestures and passionate declarations. This is the story of emotional mathematics, where one person somehow solves an equation that has stumped countless others. They crack the code not through persistence or charm, but by being precisely what the avoidant never knew they needed: someone who makes attachment feel safe. The avoidant, who has left a trail of broken hearts and abandoned connections, will encounter this person and experience something unprecedented: the absence of their usual flight response. The walls that have stood impenetrable for decades develop a single door, and that door opens for only one person in their entire existence. This phenomenon is as rare as it is absolute. The avoidant doesn't form multiple deep bonds throughout their lifetime. They don't have several meaningful relationships that teach them about love. They have one person who becomes their exception to every rule they've ever made about emotional self-preservation. The chosen one doesn't transform the avoidant into someone capable of loving everyone. They simply become the sole recipient of whatever capacity for love exists within that carefully guarded heart. The avoidant remains exactly who they've always been with everyone else: distant, unavailable, allergic to intimacy. But with this one person, they discover they can love without dying from it. It's not that the avoidant suddenly becomes emotionally healthy or develops superior relationship skills. They simply find someone with whom their particular brand of dysfunction creates a functional dynamic. Their emotional limitations perfectly complement this person's emotional needs, creating a bizarre harmony that works for both parties. This bond, once formed, becomes unbreakable, not because it's perfect, but because it's the only one of its kind in the avoidant's emotional repertoire. They guard it with the fierce protection of someone who knows they'll never find another like it. The question isn't whether this rare connection exists. It does. The question is whether you're unfortunate enough to love an avoidant while being the wrong person, or fortunate enough to be the right person for someone whose love, once given, becomes a lifetime sentence. The profile of the chosen one. The person who captures an avoidant's lifelong devotion possesses a combination of traits so specific they might as well be a psychological unicorn. They are neither the most beautiful person the avoidant has encountered, nor the most successful, nor the most charming. They are simply the most precisely calibrated to bypass every emotional alarm system the avoidant has spent decades perfecting. This chosen one operates at exactly the right emotional temperature, warm enough to provide comfort, but never hot enough to trigger panic. They express interest without desperation, affection without suffocation, needs without neediness. They have mastered the art of being present without being invasive, caring without being clingy, available without being convenient. Most importantly, they possess an almost supernatural ability to remain unruffled by the avoidant's emotional inconsistencies. When the avoidant retreats, they don't chase. When the avoidant creates distance, they don't bridge it. When the avoidant tests their patience, they respond with the steady indifference of someone watching clouds change shape. Mildly interesting, but not worth getting upset about. The chosen one doesn't try to fix the avoidant or unlock their emotional potential. They accept the avoidant's limitations with the same casual acceptance one might have for gravity or the need for sleep. Inconvenient perhaps, but ultimately unchangeable and therefore not worth fighting. This acceptance paradoxically makes the avoidant feel safe enough to occasionally exceed their own limitations. They possess their own emotional fortress, but theirs is made of confident self-sufficiency rather than fearful isolation. They don't need the avoidant to complete them, validate them, or provide constant reassurance of their worth. They exist as fully formed individuals who happen to enjoy the avoidant's company rather than incomplete souls seeking wholeness through connection. The chosen one speaks the avoidant's language fluently, not the backwards dialect of push-pull dynamics, but the quiet language of parallel existence. They can sit in comfortable silence, appreciate indirect expressions of care, and understand that love sometimes looks like simply being allowed to exist in someone's carefully controlled space. Perhaps most crucially, they possess an almost pathological level of emotional patience. Not the desperate patience of someone waiting for crumbs, but the serene patience of someone who genuinely doesn't mind waiting because they're perfectly content with their own company in the meantime. They don't experience the avoidance emotional unavailability as rejection because they don't need constant emotional availability to feel secure. They're often people who have their own relationship with solitude, their own appreciation for independence, their own understanding that some of life's most meaningful connections exist in the spaces between words rather than in endless conversation. They don't mistake emotional intensity for emotional intimacy, which makes them safe for someone who confuses intensity with danger. The chosen one becomes the avoidance exception because they never demanded to be the rule. The timing of cosmic alignment. The avoidant doesn't encounter their lifelong person during the turbulent years of their youth, when their emotional chaos burns hottest and their capacity for self-destruction peaks. This meeting occurs during a very specific phase of their emotional evolution, when they've grown sufficiently tired of their own patterns to stop actively maintaining them, but not so tired that they've given up on connection entirely. This timing is crucial because it catches the avoidant in a rare state of emotional exhaustion rather than emotional panic. They've spent decades perfecting the art of emotional escape, and they finally reach the point where running requires more energy than staying. Their usual flight response has been worn down by repetition until it's more habit than instinct. The chosen one arrives when the avoidant has accumulated enough relationship wreckage to recognize their own patterns, but before they've become completely cynical about the possibility of connection. They're old enough to be weary of their own emotional games, but young enough to still possess some buried hope that maybe, possibly, with the right person, things could be different. This is not the passionate attachment of youth, with its dramatic highs and devastating lows. This is the quiet recognition of someone who has tested every exit door and finally encountered a room they don't immediately want to escape. The bond forms not in a burst of overwhelming feeling, but in the gradual realization that being with this person requires less emotional armor than being alone. The avoidant has typically just emerged from their latest relationship disaster, the inevitable result of their push-pull dynamics, finally pushing someone past their breaking point. They're in that familiar post-relationship state of relief mixed with regret, convinced once again that they're simply not built for lasting connection. They're not actively seeking love, they're actively avoiding it. This is precisely when the chosen one appears, not as a romantic pursuit, but as a comfortable presence. They don't arrive with declarations of intent or demands for commitment. They simply exist in the avoidant's peripheral vision, gradually becoming part of their landscape without ever forcing their way to the center. The timing creates a perfect storm of circumstances. The avoidant is too emotionally depleted to maintain their usual defenses, too tired to run from someone who isn't chasing them, and too worn down by their own patterns to immediately activate their sabotage protocols. The chosen one slips past their barriers not through force, but through the simple absence of threat. The cosmic alignment occurs when the avoidant's emotional exhaustion meets the chosen one's emotional self-sufficiency, creating a dynamic where attachment can form without triggering the avoidant's survival instincts. For once, getting close to someone feels easier than staying away. The absence of traditional romance. Their connection lacks the dramatic passion that fills romance novels and fuels relationship fantasies. There are no grand gestures, no desperate proclamations, no explosive chemistry that lights up rooms and makes other couples jealous. Instead, there's something far more dangerous to the avoidant: comfortable consistency. The chosen one offers a love so steady it becomes gravity, invisible but essential. This relationship develops like a slow-growing tree rather than a wildfire. Months pass before either party can pinpoint when friendship became something more. There's no dramatic moment of realization, no passionate first kiss that changes everything, no night of earth-shattering intimacy that seals their fate. Instead, there's the gradual recognition that this person has become necessary in the most understated way possible. The chosen one doesn't try to sweep the avoidant off their feet because they understand, perhaps intuitively, that the avoidant finds being swept off their feet terrifying rather than romantic. They don't create butterflies in the avoidant's stomach. They create something far more valuable, peace in the avoidant's nervous system. Their dates look nothing like traditional courtship. They consist of parallel activities that require minimal emotional vulnerability, grocery shopping together, reading in the same room, watching movies without the obligation to discuss their deeper meaning. They build intimacy through proximity rather than through emotional excavation. The chosen one never pushes for relationship milestones or romantic escalation. They don't ask where things are going, when they'll become official, or what their future looks like together. They exist entirely in the present moment, which is the only temporal space where the avoidant feels safe. This absence of pressure allows the avoidant to attach gradually, organically, without feeling like they're being pulled into something against their will. Even their expressions of love lack traditional romance. The avoidant doesn't bring flowers or write love letters. They show their devotion by remembering how the chosen one likes their coffee, by automatically grabbing an extra phone charger when they travel, by being available without being asked. Their love language is practical consideration rather than romantic gesture. The chosen one receives this understated affection and recognizes it for what it is, the maximum emotional expression of someone operating at their full capacity. They don't mistake the absence of grand romance for the absence of deep feeling. They understand that for the avoidant, consistency is more romantic than passion, reliability more meaningful than surprise. This absence of traditional romance becomes their strength rather than their weakness. Without the pressure to perform love in conventional ways, the avoidant can simply live love in their own limited but genuine capacity. The mirror effect. The chosen one possesses an almost supernatural ability to reflect the avoidant's emotional capacity without exceeding it. They don't demand more intimacy than the avoidant can provide, but they don't accept less than they deserve. They create a perfect emotional equilibrium that allows the avoidant to love at their maximum capacity without feeling overwhelmed or underwhelmed. This mirroring happens unconsciously, but its precision is remarkable. When the avoidant can offer 70% emotional availability, the chosen one somehow needs exactly 70%. When the avoidant's capacity fluctuates down to 50% during stressful periods, the chosen one's expectations mysteriously adjust to match. They create a dynamic where the avoidant never feels emotionally bankrupt or emotionally excessive. The chosen one doesn't achieve this balance through conscious manipulation or calculated strategy. They simply possess their own emotional rhythm that happens to sync perfectly with the avoidant's limitations. They're naturally satisfied by the level of connection the avoidant can sustain, which removes the pressure that typically causes avoidance to flee. This perfect calibration extends to every aspect of their interaction. The chosen one needs the same amount of alone time the avoidant requires, enjoys the same level of social interaction the avoidant can tolerate, and desires the same pace of relationship progression the avoidant can handle. They don't need to compromise or adjust their expectations because their natural preferences align with the avoidant's capabilities. The mirror effect creates a relationship where neither person feels starved or suffocated. The avoidant doesn't experience the familiar panic of someone wanting more than they can give, and the chosen one doesn't experience the familiar frustration of someone offering less than they need. They exist in a rare state of mutual satisfaction with exactly what's available. Most importantly, the chosen one reflects the avoidant's emotional availability back to them without judgment or attempts at modification. They don't try to stretch the avoidant's capacity or encourage emotional growth. They simply work with whatever emotional material they're given, like a skilled architect designing a beautiful home within very specific constraints. This acceptance paradoxically allows the avoidant to occasionally exceed their own limitations, not because they're being pushed to grow, but because they feel safe enough to experiment with emotional expansion. When someone isn't demanding more from you, offering more becomes a choice rather than an obligation. The mirror effect ensures that the avoidant never encounters the relationship dynamics that typically trigger their flight response: emotional imbalance, unmet expectations, or the pressure to be someone they're not capable of being. the gradual imprisonment. What begins as comfortable companionship slowly transforms into dependency so subtle, the avoidant doesn't recognize it until removal becomes unthinkable. The chosen one becomes woven into their daily existence like morning coffee or evening solitude, not passionate but absolutely necessary for functional living. This imprisonment occurs through the gradual erosion of the avoidant's ability to imagine life without this person's steady presence. The process happens in microscopic increments over years, not months. The avoidant doesn't wake up one day and realize they're attached. Instead, they slowly discover that their carefully constructed life of independence now has this person threaded through every aspect of it. The chosen one becomes part of their routine so seamlessly that extracting them would require dismantling the entire structure of daily existence. The avoidant begins to make decisions with this person in mind without consciously realizing they're doing it. They buy coffee they don't drink because the chosen one prefers it. They avoid scheduling weekend trips during times when the chosen one is available. They start thinking in terms of we when making plans, though they deny this linguistic shift if confronted with it. This dependency doesn't feel like traditional attachment because it lacks the emotional intensity that typically terrifies avoidance. Instead, it feels like practical convenience. The chosen one simply makes life easier, more comfortable, more manageable. They become a functional enhancement rather than an emotional necessity, which allows the avoidant to accept their presence without triggering alarm bells. The imprisonment deepens when the avoidant realizes that losing this person would require not just emotional adjustment, but complete lifestyle reconstruction. They've built their life around the assumption of this person's presence, their living space, their social connections, their daily rhythms. Everything has been unconsciously organized around accommodating this relationship. The chosen one becomes the avoidance anchor to normalcy. They're proof that they're capable of sustained human connection. They're evidence that they're not completely broken. Losing them would mean losing not just their companionship, but their entire sense of themselves as someone who can maintain a relationship. The stakes become existential rather than merely emotional. By the time the avoidant recognizes their imprisonment, escape has become impossible, not because they're physically trapped, but because they've lost the ability to imagine a version of themselves that exists without this person. The chosen one has become so integral to their identity that removing them would require becoming someone completely different. The most terrifying aspect of this gradual imprisonment is that it feels like choice rather than compulsion. The avoidant continues to believe they could leave if they wanted to, right up until the moment they realize they no longer want to leave. The price of being chosen. For the rare person who captures the avoidant's lifelong devotion, the victory is both sweet and bitter. They receive unwavering loyalty from someone incapable of giving it to anyone else, but they also inherit the responsibility of being someone's sole source of emotional connection to humanity. This privilege comes with a price that few people are equipped to understand, let alone pay. The chosen one becomes the avoidant's only emotional outlet, their singular safe person, their exclusive source of interpersonal warmth. While this creates unbreakable intimacy, it also creates suffocating responsibility. They cannot simply be themselves in this relationship. They must be the avoidant's entire emotional world, their only bridge to human connection. This responsibility manifests in subtle but pervasive ways. The chosen one learns that they cannot have emotional crises without destabilizing the avoidant's entire support system. They cannot need excessive comfort, demand intensive care, or require dramatic emotional labor because the avoidant has no one else to turn to when their chosen one becomes unavailable. They become the sole curator of the avoidant's emotional experience, responsible for maintaining the perfect temperature that keeps their partner functional. Too much emotional heat and the avoidant retreats. Too little and they become depressed. The chosen one must calibrate their own emotional expression to keep their partner in the narrow band of comfort that allows them to remain present. The chosen one also inherits the burden of being irreplaceable. In normal relationships, people know that if things don't work out, both parties will eventually find other connections. But the chosen one knows that if they leave, the avoidant will likely never form another deep bond. This knowledge creates a kind of emotional hostage situation where leaving feels not just like ending a relationship, but like condemning someone to lifelong isolation. Their own social life becomes complicated by their partner's inability to form other meaningful connections. They cannot simply introduce the avoidant to their friends and expect normal social integration. The avoidant remains their private companion, someone who exists fully only within the boundaries of their exclusive relationship. The chosen one must also accept that they will never know what it feels like to be loved by someone whose full emotional capacity is available to them. They receive the avoidant's maximum output, but that maximum represents a fraction of what most people consider normal emotional reciprocity. They must find satisfaction in being loved at the highest level someone is capable of, rather than at the level they might prefer. Perhaps most challenging, the chosen one must live with the knowledge that their love is not transformative. They have not healed the avoidant or unlocked their hidden emotional potential. They have simply found someone whose limitations perfectly accommodate their needs. Their love story is one of compatibility rather than growth, acceptance rather than change. The unbreakable bond. Once formed, this connection becomes as permanent as bone structure, not because it's perfect, but because it exists in a category entirely separate from the avoidant's other human experiences. The bond survives conflicts that would destroy normal relationships, weathers neglect that would kill ordinary love, and endures indifference that would send most people running for the exit. It persists not through the strength of passion, but through the simple absence of alternatives. The avoidant guards this relationship with the fierce protection of someone who knows they're holding their only winning lottery ticket. They may treat the chosen one with casual indifference day to day, but any genuine threat to the connection triggers a survival response that surprises everyone, including themselves. They become capable of relationship maintenance they've never demonstrated before, not because they've learned new skills, but because the stakes have finally become high enough to motivate effort. This protection extends to defending the relationship against external threats they would normally ignore. The avoidant who couldn't be bothered to introduce previous partners to family members suddenly becomes territorial about protecting their chosen one from criticism. They develop previously unknown capacities for compromise, communication, and conflict resolution. Not because they've grown emotionally, but because losing this person is literally unthinkable. The bond becomes unbreakable because it exists outside the normal rules of relationship dynamics. Traditional relationships require ongoing emotional maintenance, regular expressions of care, and continuous relationship building. This connection survives on autopilot, sustained by its own irreplaceability rather than by active cultivation. It exists in a state of perpetual low-level maintenance that somehow proves sufficient for both parties. Even periods of distance or conflict cannot permanently damage what they've built. The avoidant may retreat into their fortress of solitude for weeks or months, but they always return to this one safe harbor. The chosen one may grow frustrated with their partner's limitations and threaten to leave, but they never quite manage to follow through because they know they'll never find another connection this perfectly calibrated to their needs. The unbreakable nature of their bond becomes both its greatest strength and its greatest limitation. It provides security that neither party has experienced elsewhere, but it also eliminates the healthy tension that drives most relationships toward growth and evolution. They achieve permanent stability at the cost of permanent stagnation. The myth of the exception. The cruel irony of this phenomenon is that it creates a dangerous myth for everyone else unfortunate enough to love an avoidant. The belief that if they're patient enough, understanding enough, perfect enough, they too might become the chosen one. Countless people waste years of their lives trying to earn the exception status that was never actually earned by its recipient, but simply existed as a matter of cosmic accident. The chosen one didn't become special through superior strategy, deeper understanding, or more skillful navigation of the avoidant's emotional landscape. They became special through the random alignment of personality traits, timing, and circumstances that created perfect compatibility with someone else's dysfunction. Their success cannot be replicated because it was never actually achieved. It simply occurred. This myth destroys more hearts than the avoidant's actual behavior ever could. People torture themselves trying to decode what made the chosen one different, assuming there must be some learnable skill or achievable standard that grants access to the avoidance capacity for attachment. They study the chosen one like scholars examining ancient texts, searching for the secret formula that will unlock their own path to exception status. The truth is far more devastating. There is no path. The chosen one's status was determined by factors beyond anyone's control. Their natural emotional rhythm, their unconscious needs, their accidental compatibility with someone else's specific brand of damage. They won a lottery with odds so astronomical that buying more tickets is mathematically insane. Yet, people continue to play this lottery, convinced that their love is strong enough, their patience deep enough, their understanding complete enough to overcome the simple mathematics of incompatibility. They exhaust themselves trying to become someone they're not, in order to earn something that cannot be earned. The myth of the exception prevents people from accepting the simple truth that some avoidants will never choose them, not because they're insufficient, but because they're not the one person in the universe whose emotional needs perfectly align with that particular avoidance emotional capacity. The failure to become the exception isn't a reflection of their worth, it's a reflection of probability. The kindest truth that can be offered to those chasing exception status is this: the chosen one's position is not available for application, cannot be earned through effort, and should not be pursued through self-modification. It exists as a singular occurrence that happens to one person per avoidant, and the selection process is entirely outside conscious control. Stop trying to become the exception. Start looking for someone who doesn't require you to be one.